sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between tenacity and banging your head against a wall. That's always present in the questioning, is this something I push harder on, or do I do something different?
Hey, cuties. This is the Dark Side of Perfect. I'm your host, Maggie, and today we are going to be talking about cultivating intention and kind of when you're going on a new path, how to think through some of the decisions that you make so that you feel like you're being your most authentic self. For this conversation, I'm joined by my friend Jolene, who has had a bit of a windy road, but is described by every person who's ever met her as deeply thoughtful and incredibly sure of her path. Even if she doesn't feel that way, we feel like she feels that way. So I thought that she could come on and talk to us about how she cultivates that aura and that intention, and maybe give us some of her sage wisdom of how we can cultivate it for ourselves. So let's talk about it. Hi, Jolene. Welcome to the Dark Side of Perfect.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Before we get started, do you want to give just like a quick overview of yourself and why you're here?
Sure. So I'm Jolene Collins. My current role is the community engagement manager for Palmer Land Conservancy here in Pueblo, Colorado. But a lot of folks know me as the JoJo of JoJo's Sriracha. But like you alluded to, my career has been winding. So those are just kind of two slices of the pie, and I'm sure we'll talk about more today.
I would love to talk about all of those things. In this podcast, we talk a lot about being a perfect girl, and what that looks like is speed racing through life, wanting to get to the end goal, wanting it to be all or nothing, and then kind of putting all of your focus into one decision and then sticking with that decision, even if it no longer makes you happy, and how hard it is to change your mind, and how hard it is to go against the grain of what people tell you should do, and things like that. So, I want to talk about what it means to be intentional, what it means to recognize that something isn't working. And with your path at JoJo Sriracha and now at Palmer, I feel like you've had some of these experiences. And so, thinking about intention and what being intentional means in your career path, do you want to go over your windy journey and what that looks like going from JoJo Sriracha to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. And I was thinking about this before today that even JoJo Sriracha or my current role at Palmer or even my role in between that, I've found that folks that I meet, they're kind of just experiencing the person that they know from the moment they meet me to however long we know each other. And that there's often, to me, it's almost like an information gap because they didn't know the Jolene before that. When I started college. I actually went to college for audio engineering. Music is a huge passion of mine, and I interned in a music studio in New York City and kind of did learn that the call was to either sell my soul to the music industry or do something different. So that was no longer working, and I switched to communications, which was something that I had studied in college and was really moved by. The largest piece of my academic background is actually in communication studies, and so I spent a lot of time teaching communication classes at community colleges, and that's something that some people know and some people don't.
Mm,
And kinda towards the end of that had kind of sort of fallen into the sriracha business as like a kinda quintessential accidental entrepreneur where you start doing something, like for me, it was, um, starting a yoga teacher training and then changed my diet and my relationship to food, and then I just wanted a higher quality sriracha, and then that took me on like a 15-year journey, so
yeah,
I've
I
seen
was
that.
gonna say, how do you accidentally fall into sriracha? But that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think that if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, you can get yourself into trouble with all kinds of ideas, and that was the one that I
For
happened
sure.
to kind of see through the longest, but it was not my intention to do that by any means. I just kinda, hopped on and rode that wave, and similarly had found that, teaching, while I absolutely love teaching and still do, it felt kinda confined, like very a lot of bureaucracy in those institutions, and, that it felt kinda like I wasn't gonna be able to spread my wings, or even the idea of not being able to was enough for me to pivot at that time. So, a winding road for sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Those are a couple other slices of the pie.
Yeah. For the listeners, Jolene and I met at the Pueblo Food Project, which is a nonprofit that deals with food systems to get food to community members in Pueblo. So a lot of her path is very much food systems. And I think it's really cool that in all of your stories, I guess, started with music and then went to communications and now food. It's like some switch turned when you started your yoga teacher training and now you found that food was really important to you. And now, no matter what you're doing, entrepreneurial, corporate, whatever, you're focusing on something that you know is a core value. And that's like your pillar. And then whatever you do above that goes towards that pillar, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's sweet even kinda hearing you reflect that, and I think even as a kid and a teenager, I've always been obsessed with food, and I think it's such an important part of our daily lives and our health in general, so, yeah, no surprise to kinda hear that has been a common theme.
So, like I said in my intro, people view you as a very intentional, sure of yourself person. Do you view yourself that way with this windy path that you've had?
First of all, that's very sweet. It's like yes and no. I definitely consider myself an intentional person. And I have a little bit of like an internal conflict of people who perceive me to be very grounded, very sure of myself, kind of very knowing, while inside my landscape is a lot more swirling, a lot more unknown. Just still kind of trying to find my own way. And I think part of that has to do with how long I taught public speaking for. I was sort of constantly talking about how to present yourself professionally, how to talk clearly, how to make space for conversation. And so I feel like there's like a little bit of a double-edged sword where maybe I unintentionally just do those things where inside I feel a lot more vulnerable or mixed up, and I wish that people could see that, and so I also have to work to kind of try to find ways to
Yeah.
express that inner
To kind
Lance.
of break the presentation a little bit so that people can see the more vulnerable side. Do you think
Yeah.
that that contributes to what you said earlier about how people meet you once and then they apply that person to who you are for the rest of your life? Is like that you just present very well?
Yeah, I think it's sticky for people. I think that they feel that, and at the same time, there is a very grounded, anchored part of my person that's very true and authentic. I think I just would love a little more opportunities to kind of be in the swirl with folks.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect opportunity to be vulnerable. Show
Yeah,
those cracks.
let's go.
First of all, I want to say that as a perfect girl who has made like 1,000 career shifts and doesn't know what she wants to do with her life and is just moving through it, I admire your story so much and going from JoJo Sriracha to where you are now and recognizing that you needed a shift from that entrepreneurial spirit that was dragging you down a little bit to this thing where you can still do something very important within your values. When you were going through that change and that shift, even from communications to Sriracha, when you were making those choices, how did you recognize it as like a, oh, this is time to move on from what I'm doing right now into something else rather than I'm failing at this and I need to work harder kind of a mindset?
Yeah, sometimes I like to talk about it's hard to tell the difference between tenacity and banging your head against a wall.
Yeah.
And I think that that's always present in the, like, questioning, "Is this something I push harder on, or do I do something different?" Although I will say, backing up a little bit, I think one of the things that really opened up the shift from the kind of truly entrepreneurial journey was 2022, which was a really transformational year for me. It started on January 1st, where my grandma broke her leg. That was not a good thing. And then kind of quickly evolved into like my dad was sick. He passed later that year in July. My sister was sick with kidney disease, and then I broke up with my partner of 10 years in August, so a lot happened in 1
Yeah.
year, and the way I describe it was like it was like all the tectonic plates of my life were shifting at the same time, and after all those kind of big things happened, it felt like I was left with sort of just like an open space of like, "What do you do now?"
Yeah.
And I felt that and was very aware of it, and it felt like the right thing to do was to just kind of sit in the openness and kind of think and ponder, and part of that too, I believe, came from losing my dad, and, I lost my mom when I was 15 as well, so it was kind of a second iteration of that kind of huge grief, and it was different with my dad being much older and kind of recognizing what was happening. But I think that in those times of great loss, there is a lot of wisdom that comes through in those moments. You really get to take stock of what matters and what's important. And a lot of the like little things really kind of dissolve away.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, do I wanna stay in Pueblo? I talked about moving to Portugal. My friends were starting an Airbnb there. Do I go to the East Coast? Do I go back to the West Coast? And then some things really kinda started to drop in, and I think one of the big deciding factors with JoJo's and that entrepreneurial path was, a change in my mindset around, risk and being more risk adverse because,
Sure.
at that point, my mom's gone, my dad's gone, I don't live around my family, so, like, when you talk about feeling vulnerable, there isn't this, like, "I'm gonna go out and try and do this thing and risk it all." Like, I really felt like I needed to take care of myself and my security, my financial security, my happiness, and I think that that risky entrepreneurial path didn't seem like a good fit for that, and I had never really had, like, a real job, and so even moving into those kinds of roles where you get a paycheck every 2 weeks and you get some health benefits was, like, very unfamiliar, but felt
Yeah.
like the thing that could help provide some security, both, like, the actual tangible things, but also show up in a way that's, like, where if people can't provide you that security, that thing can, and so that felt like the place I needed to move towards, and that was really what was front of mind, and I think still is as I figure out kinda my path forward.
Yeah. So kind of like assessing values versus risk and trying to make all of the pieces of your life fit together depending on what your situation is at the moment and trying to figure out what would best work towards that while also maintaining like your food systems or you love teaching, whatever you want to do, and trying to keep that. But then if your values change, moving on to something else.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs like to talk about how much they do by themselves, and I made all this by myself, but when you really look at it, there's often a pretty strong support network, which is great. It's parents, it's family, it's friends, it's their communities, and so when I really looked around, that did not feel as strong as it needed to be for me to kind of continue to take on risk and didn't really feel smart, and also, I
Yeah.
had like I said, I didn't intentionally set out to create a Sriracha business,
Yeah.
so I was like it wasn't like I said I wanted to do this thing, it was just like, here we are, so I think there was an openness to doing something different or maybe doing something more intentional that's like, "Okay, I've learned these lessons. What's the thing I do now that I'm actually trying to do?"
Yeah, I've actually heard something similar before when I was in grad school. They would say, "Don't look for a job, look for what you're gonna learn in that job so you can take it to something that you'll eventually, like, really want to do." And so I think that that's an interesting point of, like, the risk assessment, values assessment, support network, but then also thinking, "Okay, what did I learn from this experience, and what can I take to my next role that will better suit where I am in my life right now, and how to use that to cultivate more intention for what you're doing in your path."
Yeah, absolutely. I think any attempt to start your own business is such a rich learning path that I'm not sure how else you could learn those things except to give it a go and see what happens.
As we're talking about changing your mind as your needs change, there can obviously be shame associated with changing your mind, especially as a perfect girl. Like for JoJo Sriracha, for example, if you work really hard on it and then you're no longer doing it and you're going against what you should do, which is like continuing it, turning it into like a public thing or whatever, how do you work past the noise as you've made pivots in your life? Or do you?
I think you're right that there is a lot of pressure to stay in the shoulds, that we should do this, and also for me, a bit of like a I felt a little confined to the identity of the JoJo of JoJo's Sriracha because it really just felt like not necessarily a small piece of the pie that's me, but certainly not a comprehensive one. And it had this particular kind of shininess to it that people are really drawn to that it was not the same experience for me. Like working in a commercial kitchen around food is, like, hard, go home smelling like fermented chilies and garlic, and a lot of those things are just really challenging and not glamorous, and maybe it's, like, kind of the social media of it all that has, like, a different flavor from the outside, so I never got the, like, "Ooh," and that's not that kind of, like, weird quasi-celebrity, mostly made me feel a little uncomfortable, I think especially as I
Yeah.
got older.
Yeah, so the perception of the should, of what people were telling you to be and putting you in the shiny bubble of, "Oh, entrepreneur, queen," was not actually the reality of it, and sometimes you have to think about the reality more than the perception, or else you're just gonna be unhappy forever.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's it's me who has to make those decisions for myself, and sometimes I wish it was easier to sort of help people around me, kind of jump on the train, like, "Okay, we're going to a new spot because it's clear and works for me, and I'm happy and good to go." And I think some people are like, "Wait, what?" Or, like, we have to kind of organize people's in these, like, little folders in our minds, and now they have to reorganize. Generally, if I'm in those, like, kinda big transition moments, I keep my circle of feedback very small to the folks that really have a bigger perception of me and my life and my values and what I want, and really kind of only listen to, like, that little circle of trust,
Yeah.
and then kind of, like, let that truth be told to others afterwards. Ended up selling the company to a young entrepreneur and can keep it in Pueblo. That felt really worthwhile. By the time it was kinda said and done, I was done and ready, maybe other people weren't, and so we just kinda have that, like, juxtaposition of how I feel and other people feel.
I wanna move on to talking about intention a bit more intentionally. So, as a chronically online girl, we hear a lot of ideas about what intention is, about, perfect morning routines, moving very slowly, lemon water, and like the perfect written out to do list in cursive letters. But while doing all of those things, doing it perfectly and making sure to post it so that everyone knows that that's what you're doing, and doing everything within the bounds of the quote unquote right structure. So, as someone who thinks of herself as being intentional and who the world thinks of as being intentional, what do you think of when I say the word intention or be more intentional? Like, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, when I think about that word, I have this sort of nonverbal response, and I know folks listening can't see, but it's like sort of have my hand at my chest and it's pointing forward. Like it's this thing that's out in front that you're looking to the future. You're kind of moving your brain and your thoughts and your energy into the future and thinking about like how can I manifest forward? And you're in this unknown space. You're not in the future, you're in the present. So, like, that intention is kind of just a bit of an energy switch of going into that space that doesn't exist yet, that maybe you're trying to harness something there.
That makes sense. So, like, being where you are and then taking a moment to put yourself into the unknown and figure out what kind of scene would form around you that you want to start kind of manifesting, and then coming back to the present and then working towards that thought.
Yeah, and it's so cyclical because there's so much we
Yeah.
can't do, or right? It's the future. We know it's the unknown, and yet there does seem to be some possibility there about how we create what that future looks like. Like, that also feels undeniable as much as we know that that's totally unknown.
So then in your day to day, since we can't constantly be sitting here thinking about our future and we want to be present, in your day to day, do you have, I guess, a strict morning routine or any like intentional practices that you do that help with building the self and that intention and working towards that future unknown?
I was having a giggle about the lemon water. I often joke that I only have 2 good habits, and it's lemon water in the morning and tea at night. Fully obsessed with beverages, but I usually do start my morning with tea, which could become lemon water, which is maybe some kind of concoction depending on, like, how much energy I have that morning. I have coffee every morning, and I absolutely love the ritual of coffee, but I always try to make sure that I'm having at least water or something beforehand that kind of makes my body feel good before just having the coffee. And
Yeah,
then
so it's
similarly, I'm obsessed with tea at night. I drink so
yeah.
much tea, and that is absolute routine. And yet those things ebb and flow, like what I'm doing in them or like what kind of coffee or how I'm putting that together changes all throughout the years.
So it's not like a stagnant, strict routine. It's like, okay, what is my energy telling me to do today? What do I actually needing that will make me feel good this morning? And then doing that instead of having like a strict set routine.
Yeah, and I have a fair amount of routine in my life, and yet I would never say, like, I love routine, I don't feel rigid. I think fundamentally, I'm a bit of a hedonist, and I like to do things that make me feel good, and those are things that make me feel good on the regular. And then throughout the day, the other things that really stand out to me are having a walk, like getting outside, having a quiet moment or, to think through a work thing or a personal thing or just to have a minute as a human to take stock, to have those breaks in the day, and then good physical exercise, big piece of that. So, usually every day there's some kind of yoga class, spin class, or some kind of fun getting outside, moving your body around, like and again, without those things, I don't feel good, so that's really what draws me back to that is just that feeling of more energy, more grounded, peace, let your physical body settle, take care of that.
Yeah. No, I'm very similar. I do things that make me feel good and it depends on the energy.
And it changes, and I think it's so fun and just right to be open to the day or what you need. Like, one of the things I've been noticing, I call it the up down, like, where I will have, like, a day of good energy, little more extroverted, maybe I'm with people or at an event or out late at night or something like that. And then the next day is, like, my down, where if I'm working, I wanna be, like, at my computer, more solo, less conversations or on the phone or in meetings, and it just kinda has this, like, wave-like structure to it that the more I can kind of observe it, then I can anticipate, "Okay, if today is an up day, then tomorrow's a down day, then what am I doing the next day?" And can try and set myself up to be more in flow with what seems to be that natural rhythm of things.
And have you noticed that observing this flow and the data points of like where the flow is helps you cultivate more like self knowledge so that you can figure out what you want in that unknown space when you're looking into the future?
Oh, absolutely. I'm really obsessed with my notes. I've got probably like 2,500 notes in my phone. I'll take stock of some of these things sometimes with notes, maybe making notes around ups or downs or putting some dates to it. And I usually get a little lazy about like the real kind of nerding out of tracking of that, but I think even writing it down a couple of times helps it sort of stay relevant. And it is always great to go back to. I've been doing the same with my partner on high engagement, low engagement. So like what are the things that like you're doing where you're like, man, my brain's on fire. I'm super stoked on this. What is that? And then what are the things that you're just dreading and just don't want to? And it's really fun to kinda go back to those later and see what they are, and that can absolutely help when you're doing some reflection or making decisions or needing a change.
Yeah. No, I've definitely talked about that on the podcast before of like not using your feelings as data points, but how the thing that you're doing hinders your energy as data points. So like
Yes.
does this enlighten me even though maybe I don't want to do it, but like it's I actually do feel really good afterwards or the opposite and like using those as data points to try and figure out what you actually do like and what you actually want to do. So I talk about that all the time in the podcast.
I think that's so smart. That's just listening to our, call it your intuition, that nervous system.
What are one or two things that you think hinder building intention and cultivating a sense of self the most, and how do you avoid them, in your opinion?
I think that that's such an interesting question and a little tough. I'm sure there's more than I'm aware of right now, but I think one of the things that comes to mind is around social media. And that kind of comes from my perspective of people who take in social media and it becomes this place where they're comparing themselves to people. I think when we're worried about others, and I think social media can be a big, powerful influence in that. And we're
Yeah.
not thinking of ourselves, like when we're not tuning in to our authentic self, our needs, our desires, and we're looking outside, I think that is always going to hinder our ability to be in touch with ourselves, to kind of make those decisions or know what we want or pivot accordingly if you have that worry. And if you do kind of go into that space, it's kind of endless, right? Because there's a lot of people on this earth that think a lot of different things, and I think we all fundamentally kind of have very different realities, even though we like look at each other and we're like, "You look like me. We're probably
Yeah.
the same." I think it's probably a little more opposite if we dig into it. I think we all
Yeah.
have like little universes inside of us that are different, and we just kind of bump around each other. So
Mhm.
if we stay more in touch with our inner universe and stop worrying about what all the other bubbles around us think, because you could just get lost in that forever,
Yeah.
that's when you can have some more stability, more sense of self.
I really resonate with you saying that because I just bought a house, and so my whole TikTok has been interior design and how to style
Congrats,
your
so
house.
fun.
Thank you. And, like,
Yeah,
how to make your house look expensive and stuff. So I've been watching all these videos, and then I'm like, I don't even know what I like anymore. I literally had to delete TikTok off my phone because I was like, "This is really
fascinating.
swaying my opinion of my house and what it should look like." So
Yes.
that's my personal story to relate to that.
Yeah, I think that's so good. A lot of my younger years were really focused outward, and looking back, I think that it made it harder for me to figure out, like, what I like and what I wanna do. Because like, usually as you're finding your identity at those young ages, you're very focused on yourself and your internal world, and mine was
Yeah.
very outward. So even now, someone will be like, "Do you wanna go here?" And I'll have to kind of stop and, like, pause and
Yeah.
look around and be like, "Well, what do I want?" And then give that some time. So, I think it's good that you're kinda just hitting the pause and just sitting in your home and being like, what do I really want in this space for
And I
me?"
think
Really.
especially with social media, because obviously socialization for kids and adults, it's very important to have friends who have different views than you and have different lives than you so that you get a bunch of different perspectives on things. But it's also good to sit in yourself and realize what you do like and what you don't like. And then having the courage, kind of, I guess, to say, no, I don't want that, even if your friends are doing it, or even if someone on social media is doing it. But taking that pause to build that intention and that sense of self.
Absolutely.
So, if you're making decisions like going from JoJo's to where you are now or teaching to JoJo's or whatever you're doing, is there anything that you stop and ask yourself to maintain your sense of self and feel like you're doing the right thing for you so that you don't feel like you're going to question this decision later? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think because I am thoughtful and intentional, I'll go to practices of like slowing down and reflecting. Maybe I write, maybe I review those notes, maybe finding some time outside in nature to have a think in a quiet space, or even listening to music sometimes can really help me kind of tap into something that I wanna pull forward or change or remember. Those are some of the things that I'll use for figuring out how to go forward.
And when you are making those decisions and listening to music and going over your notes, how do you walk the line of fear of being wrong and having that stop you versus like curiosity of what's ahead and having that propel you?
That's such a good question. I've thought about, in some ways, being overly thoughtful or overly intentional to the point of kind of analysis paralysis.
Mm.
And I've wondered if quicker decision making would have led to, say, like more positive outcomes. And yet, when I really think about it and I go back to those experiences, it usually feels just right. And I do think that people move at very different speeds around those kinds of processes and decision making. And I think that that's just perfectly human. Like, I in a lot of ways, I appreciate and love those moments, and I'm also having what I call the experience in the experience, where I'm also kind of just loving that moment of like, "Wow, I have this thing to think about. How rich, how fun to swirl in that. It gets my brain going, gets my heart going, gets my body going." So there's a bit of a joy, and some people just like to move quickly,
Yeah.
and I think that that's totally fine, and, like, that's different than me, so I'm like, "Ah, that's weird," right? But when I look at it, I think some people are super fast, some people are super slow. Again, what is the most authentic to yourself is the most important, and that will likely ebb and flow throughout your life.
You're describing yourself as this person who thinks through things kind of slowly and doesn't make decisions off the bat. But everyone describes you as like this great listener. And especially at like trivia nights and stuff, you're always like listening and you know how to answer the question very quickly. And that you ask these really deep, thoughtful, thought provoking questions that no one else would even think of, but that like can alter the whole mission of the conversation. So even though you think of yourself as this slow decision maker, how do you think about thinking deeper in the moment so that you can ask those questions when you're just in a conversation with someone?
Yeah, and again, that's such sweet feedback. Thank you for providing that. And I know that my great love is people. I love people. I'm so curious about them. Love having this human experience, all the things that go along with it. So I think my listening comes from the joy and curiosity of just taking people in. And one of the things that I've learned with listening is that the way to be a good listener is to listen.
Mhm.
And I think it's really easy to not listen. Like, our brains are moving really fast. We're thinking about other things. We're taking in lots of stimulus, and listening is active and it takes energy. So it's something like you have to do and decide to do and put your energy towards. And I find that that offers a lot of richness in the conversation, in what comes of that interaction and dialogue with people. And I think it's also important to feel out how people like to be listened to, which you can do with people that you know over time. When I was 19, I was listening to a friend of mine in college, and I was, like, really listening, really paying attention. He was telling me something important. And he turns to me and he's like, "Are you listening to me?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
Of
"Yes." And
course, I'm listening to you.
like, "You're just, like, sitting there. You haven't said anything. Like, you're not even moving your body." And I was like, "Oh, sure. Sorry." And, like, he needed the, like, "Uh-huh. Yeah. Go on. Tell me more." Emote a little. And I think that's part of the listening as something that takes energy. I was putting all my energy into listening, less of my energy into kinda helping him along non-verbally to let him know that I was
Yeah.
listening. So I've had to make those adjustments too, and I've gotten some fun feedback with people. They're like, "You have this very serious look on your face," or, "You're doing this thing that feels a little uncomfortable." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then I can try and meet them where they are. Just like, again, just listening. Trying not to think of your question is how you get good questions, because if you actually listen to people, the questions sort of emerge, and I'm curious, and I'm usually looking for something a little more interesting, a little different too. When you're deep in the listening, those can come from the dialogue.
I think that's really interesting, and I don't think anyone's ever described listening quite like that, as it being like an active thing, and you have to turn off the thinking part of your brain to actively listen, and then the questions will come because you weren't thinking of everything else at the time that you were listening, and making it like an active thing, which I'm sure is like a muscle that you've had to learn, like your story of when you were 19, so you've learned to be a good listener. That's interesting. Any tips on how to learn to be a good listener and build that muscle?
This feels, like, similar to some of the things that I've learned just from my time studying communication. And so once you sort of see that that is the thing that you decide to do and it takes energy and you're making the decision to do it, it changes those moments. You're not just like, "Oh, I just like listen. It's like how we say, like, I just like communicate, like, or you could learn how to communicate. Like
Yeah.
you could work on it. You could take stock, you could reflect, you could ask for feedback, you could read books, right? So if it becomes a thing that you want to do, now it's just a journey. Now, so like I use what I call my observer, which is I'm doing the thing, and then my observer is me watching myself doing the thing. And that is my point of reflection that I can go to in that moment or later and be like, what was happening there? And then like just trying different things or reflecting on your approach or when something it's like say if you're having a really great conversation, taking some time to analyze like what was going on there. Why was that so rich? Or if you have a conversation that felt like rushed, or sometimes I'm really aware when I'm not listening. I can just tell people, can you stop and go back to X and repeat from there? Or I'll just say like, sorry, I got lost in my head. I wasn't listening to that last part. Can you repeat that? Like to be able to acknowledge when my brain gets sidetracked and I'm no longer listening and then be able to kind of put that into the conversation. Thinking
Definitely never thought about it that way, so that's really interesting.
yeah,
Thought-provoking, like we're talking about.
can be very rewarding. I think
Yeah.
it's worthwhile working on.
So to close out this episode, I want to ask two more questions, I think. So the first one is when you're thinking about being intentional, cultivating the idea of slow moving and making decisions and listening, where is the crossover of this idea in your personal and professional life? And do you notice more wavering in your intention in personal versus professional? And does one impact another? I know that's like 3 questions in a row, but they all kind of go together about, like, personal versus professional building intention.
Yeah, they do go together, and I think there's less of a difference in the personal and professional. I think there's different cultural norms or those like shoulds that we've talked about,
Yeah.
but you are still the same person. You are a human showing up in that context. So to me, they're always intertwined. It's like when you go to a doctor and they're looking at like one piece of you and like only looking at that piece of you, and then you're like and that's connected to every other piece. Like, we can't get away from ourselves, like, we have a professional avatar and a personal avatar, and they're 2 different people. It's the same human trying to find their way in those spaces, and I can get pretty existential about that because I'm always seeking to show up with my authentic self, which sometimes feels like it can be harder in the norms of the professional space that don't always allow space for openness or real transparency, vulnerability, those things that I think are important and could be transformative in those spaces. So for me, there's intention in both of those places, only just because it's kind of undeniable. I can't not show up that way for better or worse. I'm going to be in there and I'm going to be looking around and asking why. And hopefully I've put myself in a scenario where that has value for the organization or business where I can show up that way for the better of everyone.
When you're in the professional culture and you feel like your authentic self is being put on the back burner, do you ever feel like you're masking or code switching and kind of taking on the persona of who you should be in those spaces? And then if so, how do you pull yourself out of
That's something I'm really aware of in the moment. I think it's often emotionally intelligent to be aware of your context and your surrounding and to be adaptable in those moments. And to be aware of, am I being performative in this moment? That's something that I try and stay in tune with and avoid. I think that there's times where it makes a lot of sense where say you might be extroverting or at an event or on a microphone in front of an audience and you're just you're kind of putting on a show and that's just how it should be. And other times if you're sitting at a meeting and something comes up that you want to speak up about, then to also kind of let that let that find some space as well, which might be hard in the moment, but I always am the most happy when I feel like I can be authentic and transparent and honest, and if there's barriers to those things kind of based on the context, it can be a little uncomfortable, and usually then I'm looking at, like, does that need some kind of resolution or change, or was it a small moment, or was it meaningful enough that, like, I need to revisit that or talk to someone
Yeah.
about that.
So it's just again about taking stock of your energy, but learning how to do it in the moment so that you can be like, oh, I am being performative right now. Let me pull back on that and then figure out how to come at this from the perspective of my authentic self.
Yeah, and I think there's opportunities for ways that you can be playful and change your systems. So last year, while my team and I were working on an event, I needed to have short meetings just to go over some things really quickly. And we're like a connected crew, so usually meetings are like, "Hey, how you doing?" Right? We're kind of having that, and we created the GDB meeting, the get down to business, and those were 15 minutes where we just meet, we get down to business, and that's it. Once you kind of say that, like, there's no, "Hey, how you doing?" We'll save that for these other moments that we already have built into our schedule. I
Yeah.
just need your brain for 15 minutes. I have these things. So then also if I come off a little more like abrasive or just getting down to business, we know like that's the point and we've said that and then we can kind of
Yeah.
play with that. It's like, okay, here we go. Which would
That makes
feel
sense.
awkward if you stepped in that way at a
Yeah.
regular kind of meeting, right?
Yeah. But you created the space to do that because you know that that's what you needed in the
Yeah,
moment
like
for that specific project and
yeah, like
whatever.
we got to switch it up a little bit.
Well, to close out, there's someone listening to this right now feeling like the world is moving so fast and they're running at full speed to catch up, which I know that we've all felt. And then there's someone listening to this who is feeling like they are standing completely still as the world is spinning around them. And I just wanted to see if there's anything that you could think as you're visualizing these two people that would help them walk through life with more intention and create that self thought or their path forward.
I would say that both of you are perfect and just fine. And sometimes the world does feel like you're moving in a tornado of movement. And sometimes it feels like you're standing still and the tornado is swirling around you. I think that's part of our human experience. I would say that if being in those either of those spaces doesn't feel like the place you want to be in at that time, that's when you can move to making changes or seeing what's happening there that you fundamentally don't like, and you can move towards a different scenario, and that might take some time, but you can acknowledge, like, "I don't like the way I feel here standing while I watch the world spin around me." Whereas I can think of times where I'm standing still watching the world spin around me that are some of the most kind of beautiful human moments that I've experienced. And similarly, moving really fast can be powerful and intense and rewarding at the right time. So that little bit of a check-in, like, do I want to be here like this in this moment, or does something need to change? But both are just right.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jolene, so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. I really appreciate all your questions and your conversation. You do such a nice job. Yeah, bravo.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope that you learned something about being more intentional about where you are in this space today. If you wouldn't mind following and rating the podcast, any interaction really does help, or maybe commenting how you found intention today or what path you want to move forward on from here. If you want to follow the podcast Instagram, it is darksideofperfect.pod. That is darksideofperfect, period, Pod. I hope you're finding joy wherever you are today, and I hope that you are finding intention wherever you are today. And I will see you next time.